Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Biochemical Society and Portland Press, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, which is part of the Biochemistry Focus webinar series. Topics in the series have included different research areas in the molecular biosciences, as well as practical sessions to support career development. Each webinar will give you the opportunity to ask questions via text, and we welcome suggestions for future topics and speakers to feature in our webinar series. Please see our website for more details. I'm David Smith. I'm chair of the Biochemical Society Education and Outreach Committee. I'm Professor of Bioscience Education at Sheffield Hallam University. In this webinar, we're going to hear from the Biochemical Society's 2024 Early Career Teaching Excellence Award winner, Dr. Emma Yhnell. Emma is a multi-award-winning educator. She's a science communicator, and now, it says on my forms here, senior lecturer, but I believe you're now an associate professor, is that right? Yes, at the School of Biosciences at Cardiff University. Emma holds a BSc in biochemistry and a PhD in behavioural neuroscience, and has a PG certificate in clinical trials. As a committed change maker and a margin mover, an equality advocate, Emma has a wealth of experience in EDI and serves on a range of international advisory bodies, as well as gaining National Teaching Fellowship in 2023. Using a variety of methods to make science accessible and possible for a range of different audiences, Emma has built a reputation for her unique ability to untangle the academic, technical, and translate it into the entertaining, relevant, and engaging content. We can ask questions of Emma after the presentation, but you can send your questions during the talk. If you have any questions, please do type them into the question box as shown in the images on the screen, and we'll try to get to as many as time allows. So Emma, I'm really looking forward to this. You always give an excellent talk. I'm going to hand on over to you.
Thank you, David. That was a really kind introduction. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. I am joining you from a rather rainy Cardiff, so I hope the weather is better where you are this afternoon or wherever you're joining us from in the world. Delighted to be able to give this talk today, which is going to focus on teaching and some of the key skills that we develop as educators and teachers as well. And really excited to take any questions you might have. David's already explained how you can ask those questions, but very much looking forward to that at the end of the talk as well. So I wanted to use this talk as an opportunity to discuss how we teach, why we teach, and hopefully to give you all an opportunity to do your own self-reflection on how you might be able to take some of these top tips and hints forward in your own teaching as well. So when I teach, I love to see it as an opportunity to help other people, to engage them and to inspire them as well. So I see my teaching activities as like a performance, and I really want to be able to inspire the learners that I am teaching. And I wanted to just kick off by going back to my own school days. So this is my school, my secondary school, Chosen Hill School in Gloucestershire. Again, quite a dreary, damp day it looks from this photo. But I also have an embarrassing photo to show you. There I am at school. And it was in my school days that I really valued the importance of education, because I was really, really fortunate to have exceptional teachers, not all of them, but two that I specifically remember are these two teachers, Mrs. Thomas and Mrs. Adams. And they were both biologists. They taught me my biology A-level in particular, I remember. And I just remember going to my A-level biology lessons and loving them. I couldn't get enough. I would kind of leave school at the end of the day thinking, wow, I can learn anything. I can, study biology further, but I can use all the resources I have to research and to really get to grips with this content. And I'm really grateful that they were able to inspire me, to empower me as well as a learner of biology. And I'm sure you have had experiences as well of maybe inspiring teachers, maybe some not so much as well. And I do think we can learn as much from those who maybe didn't empower and inspire us as we can from those who did. But really an opportunity for you to reflect on those people who have inspired you in your own career journey. So that was me at school. I also wanted to give a little bit of a timeline and some context to the talk I'm going to give today. So I started off as a biochemist at Cardiff University. I chose to study biochemistry because I loved biology and chemistry at school, and I thought mishmashing the two together for an undergraduate degree would be a great idea. And I loved it. Here I am, admittedly not studying biochemistry in this photograph, but then I decided to go and study a PhD. This time it was a little bit of a move over to the field of behavioural neuroscience, specifically looking at Huntington's disease in the lab. And my PhD had its ups and downs, as most PhDs do, but I really enjoyed working in the lab. And by the end of it, I really wanted to take what I'd learnt in terms of Huntington's disease and apply it in the patient clinic to have that real world implication. So I studied a postdoc briefly, where I took some of my PhD data, and then I successfully applied for a fellowship, which was taking the data from the lab into the patient clinic. I really enjoyed this. I'm quite a people person. I love engaging with people, and also as a scientist in the clinical environment was quite an interesting experience. I was really fortunate to be able to get a postgraduate certificate in clinical trials. Had a brief moment of wanting to be somebody who worked as maybe a clinical trials manager. And after this fellowship kind of changed my plans slightly in relation to that. And I decided to apply for lectureship positions. Super competitive positions, but I was fortunate to get my lectureship in biosciences at Cardiff University, where I studied my undergraduate degree, so kind of coming full circle there. And since then, I've become senior lecturer, associate dean for equality, diversity and inclusion, and now, as David mentioned earlier, reader here in the School of Biosciences at Cardiff University. But something that I was reflecting on actually in terms of this timeline is how important education and teaching has been in my career journey. So applying for things like the Associate Fellowship of the Higher Education Academy or Advanced HE, Fellowship, Senior Fellowship, National Teaching Fellowship. And for me, education is something that really drives me. I think we're always learning, but being able to help other people understand what are often quite complex and challenging subjects is such a privilege, and I'm really grateful that I get to do that as part of my job every day. So that's a bit of a timeline for you. Something that I'm also really passionate about is kind of chipping away at the ivory tower of academia. So when you look at the kind of historical context of academia, academia was quite an elitist and exclusive club, and I'm very much about challenging this, breaking down these unfortunate power dynamics that we can often have in teaching, making science more inclusive and accessible and engaging. So I want to, I say gently chip away, maybe just break it down so that more people have access to science. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is through education and also specifically through communication. So I do lots of work in science communication, which we're going to touch on through this webinar. And something that I was fortunate to be able to do was have the opportunity to reflect on my personal teaching approach. And I've got some words on the screen there that I would like to think I channel some of my values in terms of my teaching. And I think it's important to note that this may be different for different people. Your values might not be the same as mine, and that's absolutely okay. But in having the time and the space to reflect on what's important to you in your teaching approach can be really useful. So for me, I really want my teaching to be interactive and engaging. I want my learners to have fun. I want them to be talking about the things that I did in my lectures in, a week, a month, maybe a few years' time. And I know that some students that have graduated, they have their reunions and they still talk about some of the teaching that I've done, which is such an amazing compliment. I want to be creative in my teaching. That's important to me. But I also want to be authentic. I want my teaching to be a reflection of me as a person. And I want it to be student-centered and kind as well. So a challenge to you as viewers is to have a think about what's important to you in your teaching. And something that I'm going to touch on today is when you've been able to do this and have the opportunity to reflect on your values, how we can kind of maintain them in an environment that is becoming increasingly challenging to hold true to your values while you are doing teaching. So communication in teaching is key for me, and it can be a really big problem. Enabling learners to learn, helping them to understand complex problems can be really very challenging, particularly when we're coming from an academic environment where we feel so passionately about our subject. We love it, we use acronyms, we understand the minutiae and the detail of the topic, and actually reflecting back on when you didn't understand that can be really, really important in teaching. So sometimes I think we don't have the opportunity to sit back and think, actually, do people understand that, or do I need to modify my approach? Do I need to adapt it? Can I explain this complex topic in a different way that will help learners understand it? And communication for me is absolutely key, but also that ability to reflect, to stop and to pause and say, did that person really understand it? Or do I think they understood it? Do they really meaningfully understand what I've tried to teach them? So audience is also key. And in my communication work, I was really fortunate to work in the Huntington's disease clinic with people impacted by Huntington's disease. And many of them had been diagnosed with a life-limiting neurodegenerative condition. And this really inspired me because often they were looking for information, they were trying to find out more about this condition. And it wasn't through lack of trying, but the information was just written in really inaccessible language that was pitched at the wrong audience, that was very academic, quite dry, and really hard to digest. So during that time, I wanted to spread the message about Huntington's disease. I wanted more and more people to know about it. And one of the things I want to challenge you to think about is who your audience are. So in my case, and it will be perhaps different for you, my immediate audience was Huntington's disease family members and patients. So those are the people that I was looking to engage. So that's my primary audience, if you like. But I wanted to look at the bigger picture, to expand that even further as well. So I'm really passionate about the public understanding of science and research generally as well. So broadening out from the primary audience now out into maybe a bigger audience. Increasing awareness and understanding of rare conditions. So Huntington's disease, depending on how you classify it, could be considered a rare condition. And one of the things that really upset me during my time was that actually many people who'd been diagnosed wanted more people to know about Huntington's disease, so that when they confided in someone and said, actually, I've just been diagnosed with this condition called Huntington's disease, people weren't saying, oh, I don't know what that is, or I haven't heard of that before. Brain health and disease. So as a neurodegenerative condition, I think this is a really nice way of talking about brain health and disease. Not specifically about Huntington's disease, but maybe going into schools, talking about brain health, mental health, looking after our brains. And then finally, genetics as well. So as a genetic condition, Huntington's disease is a way of talking about genetics more broadly as well. So when we think about audience, and this might be true when you're teaching or when you are presenting your PhD work or your master's work or any time that you are presenting to an audience, I want you to think about your audience, your primary audience, but then maybe how you can go a bit bigger with expanding that message out so that you can impact as many people as possible. So here are some examples of how I managed to do that then. And I was fortunate to sign up to the STEM Ambassadors programme. So a shout out to the STEM Ambassadors. If you haven't heard of them, have a look. They're a great way of engaging specifically with schools and young people. And I was able to go out into schools, and you can see the blancmange brains on the screen there. And we did some DIY brain surgery. So I was fortunate in that we were able to get some MRI scans of the blancmange brains, and we were able to hide berries, in this case, in the brains, and then challenge the children to do some brain surgery to try and extract the berries from the brains using the MRI imaging. And I mean, who doesn't love a blancmange brain? But the children loved this. It was a real opportunity for them to have fun, to learn more about the brain, and it got really, really great feedback as well. So that's an example of an audience that you might not think about in the primary sense, but secondary to that. Moving on to patient groups. So I identified this as my primary audience quite quickly. But what I didn't realise in terms of the lessons of going out and giving talks to educate people is that when I was able to talk about Huntington's disease, we actually know that it directly increased awareness of clinical trials. So if you are able to give a talk or give a lecture, the impact that you will have can sometimes be difficult to judge, but we knew that after I'd gone and given a lecture on Huntington's disease, we saw a direct increase in recruitment to clinical trials, which is great because we know that clinical trials often struggle to recruit. Increasing awareness of clinical trials as well as recruitment. So people might not be eligible for a specific trial, but being aware of it is also really important. But finally, sensitivity around communication, particularly of clinical trials. So I was very aware that there may well be people in the audience who were impacted, who might have family members who've been diagnosed, for example, and communicating with sensitivity is really, really key. I'm just going to turn my lights on, apologies. There we are, you can see me again now. But being able to communicate sensitively is really, really key. And just be mindful that in your audience, you might have people being directly affected by a condition or even indirectly affected too. So for example, a topic like dementia, I speak a lot about. There might be people in the audience who have loved ones diagnosed with that condition or may be concerned about their own health as well. General public and new audiences. So I've popped this in here because the phrase general public is often used quite readily, but in the science communication community, some people don't like this phrase. And I understand why, because within a general public audience, you have lots of different people with lots of different expertise, prior knowledge, etc. So I kind of like new audiences as a preferred phrase. But when you are giving a presentation or a teaching session and you don't necessarily know who your audience are, you might have agreed to speak at a local science cafe, for example, where anyone can sign up. And in many ways, this seminar is a bit like this. I don't know who has signed up, what your areas of expertise are, etc. So when you are pitching to an unknown audience, starting at the kind of baseline is really, really key. And sometimes people say, well, you know, Emma, you're dumbing it down. And I really don't like that because I don't think I dumb anything down. I think I'm appropriately modifying content to my audience. And I'm sure we've all been in scenarios where you go to a session and you're just lost from the beginning because it's pitched at a level which is really, really high. And, you know, maybe you've not got much sleep or you haven't had your coffee or it's just really impenetrable. The information being presented is just really complex and therefore you're not able to engage with it and you switch off. You don't pay attention. So building up the knowledge is really, really important. The power of communication in teaching. So I've covered this, and this is a really interesting image because those who share the most teach. And I think teaching is about sharing, absolutely. But when we share, we need to check that people have properly understood it. I could stand at the front of a lecture theatre for an hour and share knowledge and think that I am imparting it into my learners, but actually I don't just want to talk at them for an hour. I want them to understand. I want them to be enthused. I want them to go away thinking, wow, that was awesome. I loved going to that lecture. I learned something new. And maybe some of my learners, because we have quite large class sizes, aren't even necessarily neuroscientists, but I want them to go away and think, oh, do you know what? That was quite interesting. I really enjoyed it. So it's about sharing, but also checking in with your learners. And understanding your audience in a teaching capacity can still be quite challenging. So on the screen now, you can see the lecture theatre that I deliver most of my year one undergraduate teaching in. And you can see it's quite large. We have a class size of about 500. And I have put quite a lot of time into understanding who the people I'm teaching are, where they might come from, their levels of prior knowledge and experience, and also in asking them. Sometimes we can make assumptions of who our learners are, what they might want to know, what they might know already. So I'm constantly checking in with my learners as well. And an environment like this can be quite challenging because it's fairly static. Large group teaching can be quite challenging as well. So things like seminars and small group discussion really aren't going to work tremendously well in a lecture theatre and environment like this. So this is why I think it's important that we modify and change our approach, both to our audience, but also to the environment that we've got to work in, because I can't do anything about the fact that I've got this quite large lecture theatre to teach in. Therefore, I've got to embrace it and modify my teaching and approach to account for that, really. So I told you that I like to treat my teaching activities as like a performance, and one of the ways that I do that is how I use this space. So just in your mind's eye, think about this lecture theatre and how static that space is. It's quite steep as well, and the view from the front is very different from the view from the back. And if you haven't been into a lecture theatre that you're teaching in and gone right up to the top and looked at what the screen looks like from right at the top, I'd recommend you do, because it can look really different. And one of the reasons I was inspired to do this is because the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff in Wales is amazing. It's about 75,000, I think, seater stadium. And the reason that got me thinking about space is because I love Pink. Pink came to play the Millennium Stadium, that we have to call the Principality Stadium now. And Pink is a great example of how you can use space in really innovative ways to engage and help an audience and entertain. So I'm known for walking up the stairs and running up the stairs within my lecture space. I don't stand statically at the front. I use the space as much as I can. And there are limits to this, that you might not be able to change it too drastically, but have a think about how you're using the space that you have. If you are able to move the furniture around, as long as you put it back afterwards, that's absolutely fine as well, if that's helpful in encouraging conversation among your learners too. Another thing that I like to do is polling. So I mentioned earlier checking in with learners about whether they're understanding things. And polling in an anonymous, interactive way can be quite helpful for this. I think since COVID and moving things online, we do lots more polling. It's much more readily used in teaching. But one of the things I like to do is to check in on how my learners are. So at the very beginning of a session, when everyone's kind of settling down, I just pop up a poll asking people how they are. And I pre-populate this with a range of answers. So it might say, I'm doing great. Actually, I'm really struggling today. I'm doing fine. Some comedy ones in there, like Wales won the rugby, I'm chuffed, for example. Doesn't happen often, but I like to pop it in there when I can. And this gives me an opportunity to really feel the room When we were teaching online, I really struggled with this because you get an aura, sense of feeling in a room when you have people in person. And importantly, I pick up on this. So if half of my class are saying that they're really struggling, I will raise that. I don't just brush past it. I say something like, you know, I can see lots of you are really struggling today. I'm sorry to hear that. Remember, we've got the personal tutoring system and all of the wellbeing services available to you. So wellbeing polls are a nice way of checking in. Also enables me to check the technology and to demonstrate to the students that I genuinely care about them. I really do. I want them to be okay, and I want them to be checking in with themselves as well. The other way that I use polls in my teaching is to test knowledge acquisition. During lectures as well, we know things like attention spans can be really challenging. So I just pop up polls scattered throughout the session just to check in with learners. And student feedback is that they enjoy this. They know that they kind of can't really switch off. It's, you know, very low stakes. There's no judgment if people get the answers wrong, but it's helpful in enabling learners to reflect on whether they have actually been paying attention, or maybe they're, you know, thinking about what you've having for dinner or something like that. So polling is a really nice way of being able to interact with large groups of learners. Something else that I've implemented, I call draw-alongs. So this is something that I implemented online when we were teaching during COVID, but I've kept it and now we're back in person. And I put up a crib sheet on our learning platform, so students can download it, they can print it if they like, and then they can annotate it in real time when I'm going through the content. This work has actually just been published if you do want to look it up, but this is how I get learners to help understand quite complex topics. So we had some feedback that this particular topic in terms of understanding reflexes, students were really struggling with. So this is something that engages them and really helps them to see how this system is working. We know that it's improved understanding and knowledge acquisition in end of module exams too. So if you are introducing any innovations in your teaching, have a think about how you will know it's had an impact. Are you going to collect any data on that? Is it just something that you want to trial? How are you going to know that it's been successful? What are your measures of success? I love a demonstration. What you can see on the screen there on the top left is a cuddly neuron with some bubbles coming out of it. You've got the draw along there. Me demonstrating the reflex in the eye, and then some gummy bears that are soaked in different solutions to talk about isotonic solutions. So when you are presenting and teaching, speaking for maybe 50 minutes to an hour is quite labour intensive. I know that if I've spoken for about an hour, my throat gets a bit sore, but can you break up that flow? Can you introduce something that will actually help your learners kind of step back and go, oh, that's interesting, that's something new, that's something novel, rather than just speaking for an hour? Can you introduce anything that changes the flow of the session? And also, these are really helpful in terms of my passions around creativity and innovation and engagement too. So coming up with these demonstrations can be quite challenging, and it's all right if they go wrong as well. We'll talk about when things go wrong later. But using everyday items for demonstrating things can be a really useful way of engaging learners. The infamous mini disco. So something that I also introduced was the use of music in teaching, predominantly to overcome that really awkward dead space when everyone's joining an online meeting and everyone's a bit awkward and doesn't really know what to say. So I started playing music during that time. This has now evolved somewhat in that I ask learners if they have any song requests, and if they are in some way related to the lecture content, they're more likely to be played. So think a lecture on cardiac muscle and Bonnie Tyler, Total Eclipse of the Heart, for example. I put a little Padlet up, and then students can request the songs that they like, and they can up and down vote them. And it's just a way of helping students relax and they're coming into the lecture theatre, also gets them to think ahead in the timetable, you know, what's coming up next. And it's a bit of fun as well. And I was a little bit concerned that I might reveal my love of cheesy noughties pop, for example. But actually, there are some really classic tunes. So, for example, Electron Skeletal Muscle and Top Loader Dancing on the Moonlight goes down really, really well. Very, very popular. And it's got really good feedback. It's just a way of making the interaction a bit more interesting and engaging as well. So for me, innovations in teaching kind of have two different parts of them. You've got innovations that improve or enhance the environment. So I've mentioned the discos there, polling, but also I share my personal pronouns, which are she and her. So these for me are all about enhancing the environment so that learners are more comfortable, they are enjoying it. And these can be applied to teaching any topic, really. What I also like to do is improve the way that we communicate the content. So things like demonstration. So you can see on the screen there some vision changing goggles, which I talk about in relation to how the cerebellum processes information and it changes your field of view. So you can walk in a straight line and then put these vision changing goggles on and see how that impacts motor function, for example. The draw along I've already mentioned. Using props. So again, if you are going to use props, think about how they are going to be received in terms of size. So admittedly, at the front of a 500-seater lecture theatre, some of my props need to be really, really big so the people at the back can still see them. In an online setting, if you're kind of holding up a prop to the camera, it can be a bit smaller. And they don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be the world's most impressive prop. You can do a lot with things like a lolly stick, for example. And you can make props as well. Something I'm also quite passionate about is storytelling, and I'm going to pick up on this a bit more. But I talk very openly and honestly about my family history of dementia. So you can see my grandparents on the screen there and why I was inspired to become a neuroscientist. And I think that's really important. It goes back to my passions about breaking down the ivory tower, being authentic, but also being human and relatable, breaking down some of those power dynamics that are at play between learners and educators as well. And you can also see on the screen my two cats, Peter and Peggy. So you've got Peggy on the left there, the tabby cat, and Peter on the right, who's our black cat. And they pop up in my lectures in all sorts of ways, sometimes in the content, so thinking about how cats walk and some of the really important experiments that were done to look at stepping in cats. But they also pop up in my wellbeing polls as well, asking the students how they are as well. So again, it's about being comfortable with what you are prepared to reveal, and that will be different for all of us. But I'm very happy to share that my cats are called Peggy and Peter, and they will pop up in my lectures. So storytelling in teaching is really important. We as people love stories, and you can delve into kind of narratives and flow of stories, but actually being comfortable enough to share a little bit about you to inform your story can be really, really powerful. And I need to raise that there's definitely a line here in terms of oversharing. But if you're happy sharing a little bit about you, that's typically really well received about students. It helps them to understand that you're human too. We all have personal stories and they're really vital in kind of shaping our career. You know, what's inspired you? Why are you where you are today? Why do you love science or biochemistry or neuroscience? And storytelling can be really, really powerful in terms of emotion as well. I also wanted to be honest and talk about some of the challenges as well as the opportunities in delivering innovations in teaching. So time and resource is something that comes up time and time again. people say things like, Emma, I'd love to do more innovation in my teaching, but I just don't have the time. You know, I'm so busy, I've got work coming out of my ears. And I hear that. I hear that there are huge and significant challenges across the sector right now. We only have so much time in the day. I get that, I understand that. For me, this comes back to your values and what you are valuing the most. And for me, putting defined timelines on things has been really helpful. So, for example, I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes designing a prop. It's going to be the best it can be in those 10 minutes, and I'm not going to be beating myself up if it's a little bit rubbish still because I only had 10 minutes, and that was the time that I allocated to it. Perceptions of traditional lectures are problematic. Even now, when I talk to people, they say, oh, you're a lecturer, you know, do you stand at the front for an hour and give a really boring lecture? No, I do not. But the way that the general public and lots of students and sometimes colleagues perceive lectures is problematic. Backup plans. So there are many times when my technology hasn't worked, a prop might have exploded on the way to me walking over to the lecture theatre, etc. So backup plans, thinking about how you will overcome something if the technology doesn't work, are really, really key. But also, if it doesn't go right, it's all right to be honest with your learners and your students to say, I'm really sorry, that didn't go as planned. We'll all have a laugh about it. I'll try again next time. It shows you're human as well. Confidence and training. So something else I hear, it's quite common, is I just don't really know how to get started. And what if the students all think I'm kind of weird and they think that it's all gone wrong? And there is a certain amount of confidence that you have over time, but for me, this goes back to being authentically you, and training and practicing so that you are getting better over time. And then that translation of in-person and online teaching as well. So some of the innovations that I've included, we have kept as we've transitioned back to in-person teaching, but really thinking why you are presenting in the way that you are. What benefit is this innovation having to your teaching? There's no point in just having things for the sake of it unless it's helping your teaching in a kind of broader sense. This cartoon spoke to me, so I've kept it in here because there are lots of challenges at the moment in higher education. So this is, do you remember when all we had to do was help people? And sometimes I think it's really easy to forget that we are all people. We've all got lots going on in the world, and I'll pick up on that later. But helping people, the ability to help people understand is really, really key. I'm really sorry, I'm going to turn my lights on again. Being able to help people, having the opportunity to be that person they come to seek help from, is such a privilege. So when somebody comes to you and they're vulnerable and they're saying, do you know what, Emma, I just don't understand what you've taught me, rather than thinking, oh, for goodness sake, you know, I thought I'd done it okay, reflecting on that and saying, gosh, it must have been really brave for that person to come to me and say, do you know what, I really don't understand it. And having that ability to think about, actually, everyone is human and we're all people at different kind of stages with lots of different things going on. Being yourself and being authentic is something that I have sometimes struggled with, actually. Sometimes I might be considered a bit weird and wacky. I'm all right with that now. It took me a long time to be all right with that. But having the ability to reflect on what is being yourself. What about you are you happy to bring to your teaching and share with your learners? What's authentic to you? It's going to be different for everybody. There's no judgment here. But in being authentic and being you and giving yourself permission to be you, A, can be really empowering, and B, really helps in your teaching, because then you're not putting on a front, you're not being anyone that you're not. So authenticity is such a powerful thing in teaching. Following on from that, standing out. In being authentically you, you might or might not stand out. And that can be really challenging, because when you stand out, when you are different, when you kind of don't go with the crowd when you're pushing those boundaries and moving those margins, sometimes you do stand out. And that's okay. It's quite a vulnerable position to be in sometimes. But standing out means we're changing stuff. And I am all for that as well. Self-reflection. So some of the teaching accreditations that I've been able to obtain specifically have a lot of self-reflection in them. And I know that we're all really bad at giving ourselves the time and permission to self-reflect. Can also be really challenging, being really honest with yourself about what's going well, what you need to improve. Self-reflection and reflecting with kind, compassionate people, colleagues, friends who will give you honest opinions is really important as well. And we're always learning. We'll never be the complete product. I will never be complete. I'm genuinely always learning new things, which is really important because it's why I love what I do. Feeling the fear is how we grow. Fear is a really kind of interesting emotion. Do lots of teaching on the nervous system as well. And when you relate this back to human evolution, it's really, really interesting. Nobody likes this emotion, but it is genuinely how we grow, how we get better at things. And feeling that fear and kind of doing it anyway and overcoming it, challenging ourselves is really key. So if you're very, very comfortable in delivering your teaching, that's great. But is there any way you can really push yourself, challenge yourself, do something new? And if it doesn't work or it goes a little bit wrong, that's okay because you tried. And I think that's key in being honest with your learners that, you know, I might say to my students, I'm trialing this today. We'll see how it goes. And it will be part of the jeopardy to see whether it goes right or wrong. So feeling the fear is really, really important in teaching. And when things go wrong, because it is a when, being able to process that, not be too hard on ourselves, say that, okay, we tried and it isn't necessarily a failure, but it didn't just go as I'd planned. I think this is vital for learners to demonstrate that actually, even as academics and sometimes quite senior academics, things don't go as we plan sometimes, and it's nobody's fault. It's just the way it happened. So I don't know how I feel about failure as a prerequisite for learning, but it certainly helps in our learning. So we learn lots when things go wrong as well as when they go right. Self-awareness. So awareness of ourselves and others. So I wanted to pop this on the screen, the iceberg of life, because I think particularly post-pandemic and in an age of social media, it's really easy to focus on the sunshine and success and the accolades and the fact that everything is awesome and shiny. Be aware that lots of people are going through lots of different things and you won't necessarily see that. We're really bad at being honest and open, and sometimes people don't want to share things, and that's absolutely fine as well. But just be mindful that the profile you see on social media or you know, the press releases and the university blog posts, etc., are typically reflecting the very top of this iceberg, and often our colleagues, our students, our friends, our family have a lot going on underneath the surface, and some of that we might be aware of, much of it we won't. So for me, having that kindness and just being aware of both that in other people as well as ourselves is so, so important. Which brings me on to this, being nice and kind, because lots of people are scared. Lots of people are worried about, you know, will my teaching go as I'd planned? They might have caring responsibilities or bereavements, etc. So being kind, polite, collegiate, cutting people some slack is really, really important. And the language that we use. So when I put the title together for this webinar, I used inspiring really purposefully, because initially even I was like, oh, is that a bit icky? Do I want to inspire people? But I absolutely do. And sometimes when I say, do you know what, I want to inspire my students, people go, oh, really, Emma? Come on, calm down. But I do. I want to inspire them. I want to be that person that inspires them to go into a different career or learn something new. So you're all amazing. You really, really are, in loads of different ways. I have absolute faith that everyone in this webinar is amazing in all sorts of different ways. And don't be afraid to use that language. If you want to inspire your students, tell them. That's really powerful, both for them and for you as an educator as well. Finally then, because I'm aware of the time, I just wanted to touch on nerves, confidence and imposter syndrome, because particularly in early career cases, but also throughout our careers, many of us suffer from imposter syndrome, issues with confidence, nerves, fear. And I think it's really important we discuss this, and we discuss when things go wrong. We discuss when we are having a bad day and we're really, really struggling. So if you are comfortable and able to share that, I think it's really important. I suffer terribly from imposter syndrome at times. And having the ability to overcome that and put yourself in the room to take up space when you are nervous and scared is really key. So finally, I wanted to end with a little motivational message for you in your teaching, that you've got this, and it will all be great. And please do challenge yourself. When things will go wrong, that's okay. It's okay to be kind to yourself as well. So that's my final quote I'm going to leave you with. I love this quote: by being yourself, you put something wonderful into the world that wasn't there before. So I hope that you can all take that forward in your teaching activities. So thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Emma, amazing. Thank you so much. I've heard you speak before, and it's always a pleasure. You have such wonderful things to say. Thank you, thank you. I must admit, I've stolen your draw along idea after you presented it to me at a Bio Summit a few years ago, and I've used it with my first years to do amino acid structures, and it goes down really, really well. So you have some amazing ideas. Just a reminder, Emma is the recipient of the 2024 Early Career Teaching Excellence Award. The Society presents this award annually to outstanding educators in higher education and recognises individual excellence, commitment to continuing and professional development, and a sustained and continued impact. I can see questions appearing in my question box down at the bottom, but if you'd like to ask Emma a question, we'll get through as many as we can. So yeah, Emma, brilliant. Hang on, I'm just going to pop that back out again. So we've had a few come in. And the first one, it says, this is from Donatella. It came in really early on in your talk, and you've addressed quite a lot of it. But what, according to you, is the biggest challenge in preparing an interesting presentation materials?
Oh, hello. Thank you for your question. I think one of the biggest challenges is giving ourselves enough time to do it. So I'm certainly guilty of this, and before I know it, you know, a lecture will arrive and I think, oh, should have planned ahead. I actually allocate an hour the week before in my diary. I kind of pencil it in, and that time to reflect and to think outside the box, because the way that you present something might be quite creative, quite different. So I think that ability to see a molecular process, for example, from a different angle, and thinking about how you can communicate that in a different way. Sometimes that takes time, and you know, I might be watching telly in the evening and an idea will pop into my mind or something, but giving yourself the time to mull over, to reflect and to be creative.
Fantastic, that's good advice there. I've had pleasure to listen before, and somebody asked this same question, so I'm going to ask you it again. Emma, do you have any suggestions for how your techniques and ideas can be applied to PhD students who don't do traditional lecturing or don't do lecturing but do teach in other formats?
Yes. So PhD students are a vital resource for universities in terms of demonstrating and helping learners or undergraduates typically understand content. And you can still do this as a PhD student. Sometimes people think, well, I'm not the lecturer, I'm not the person who's in charge, but you can absolutely still trial some of these techniques. So if you're a PhD student demonstrating in a practical, you might explain an idea to a student verbally. And you can probably see on their face they don't really get it, but they might not be comfortable saying that. So you could say to that student, would you like me to try and explain it with a diagram, for example? And then you could draw them a diagram to help them understand too. Or would you like, a peer to run through that too, to maybe explain that in a different format or a different use of language? So I think if you're doing practicals or tutorials, you can really have a great opportunity to test out your communication style. And some of it will work and some of it might not. Or you might even want to do props for the practicals that you're demonstrating on or teaching in. So it's giving yourself permission to trial things out is really, really key. And you can discuss with the practical leads as well. You might want to say, one of your demonstrators in a practical, I'm thinking about how I can help the students to understand particular topics. Do you think this prop might work, or is this diagram okay? Things like that as well. So for me, it's breaking down that power dynamic again, rather than leaving all of the work up to the practical lead. You have an opportunity to help students understand too.
Fantastic, thanks, Emma. I've got another question about engaging students who have different learning difficulties. I did notice during your talk that you were an advocate, or not advocate, but you're exemplifying good slide design and accessible slide design, which I was always very pleased to see, a slide that doesn't have a white background on it and nice. But how do you deal with learning difficulties that students have in the large lectures that you're giving? We have a very diverse student body.
Yes. So additional learning needs is something that I have been working on. It's something that I have reviewed over time as well. So for example, I like to use things like sound effects in my teaching, and I know that that might be problematic for some learners. So this is something I've learned over time, and I haven't always got it right. I think it's important to be clear about that. I will offer warnings if I am going to play a particularly loud sound, for example, if there are any sensory differences within the room. And white slides are horrible, but actually learning over time as well. So I talk to students. So we have a personal tutoring system in Cardiff, and I'm very comfortable saying, to students, could I improve this? Is this something that works for somebody who has maybe additional learning needs like yourself? Could you help me understand this? And I think that's particularly important if you're coming from a place where you don't necessarily have that lived experience, and being able to ask for views and opinions is really important, because particularly with those large lecture sizes, you are going to have lots of different additional needs and learning needs within that room.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got 2 more questions. I've actually got 3 more questions that have come up, so we'll see if we can get through Fatma says, great talk. She's got 2 questions. I'm going to pick one of her 2. And it follows on from this, what methods do you have to help your students when they get overwhelmed with the amount of material and their schedules and their deadlines? How do you go about supporting that body of students?
Yes. Yes. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we know that lots of our students are taking on part-time jobs as well. They're very, very time poor. So I think this is about using the timetabled time that we have. And particularly as academics, often we love to cram so much in to a lecture slot, but actually we don't need to. It's about stripping it down. As long as you're meeting the learning outcomes, as long as you're there with those learning outcomes, actually you can pare stuff back and turn it around a little bit. I think there is so much pressure on our students, external pressure, internal pressure as well, but also just being real, and actually things are overwhelming. So when we come to exam season, for example, seeking support with that, actually can we something called chunking, so take it in chunks rather than seeing the whole of a module, for example, okay, should we focus on the first 2 lectures, for example? So there are some kind of classic psychological techniques there. But I love this question because who was it, sorry, David, that asked this?
It was Fatma, this one.
Thank you. So this is a great question because you are acknowledging it, and I think lots of people might fail to acknowledge that in the first instance. So in order to help with that, the first kind of step in that process is acknowledging it. So yeah, thank you. It's a great question.
Sarah and Joel have got a question that's about the same. This will be the last one because we'll wrap after that. They're both asking about the challenges and teaching in large group settings. So Emma asked, she's heard you can't do active learning in a lecture theatre. You totally can. Have you changed people's thoughts on doing that? And Joel added, what are the challenges when you go about doing that? So it's about the 2 questions combined about making those lectures active, and have you changed people's opinions and about how to go about doing it?
Yeah, this is a great question to end on. Thank you. So I think you will maybe never change everyone's opinion, but I am trying to change opinions slowly but surely. You can absolutely do active learning in a big group, completely, but I think it's thinking about how you do that. So you might need to think differently. You might need to introduce some technology, for example. But actually, you also have to kind of be at peace with the fact that this is the way that, you know, there are lots of things outside of my control that I can't change, i.e. the big class size and the fact that I've got the lecture theatre that I have. So work with what you've got. Is there anything that you can do? So things like props, anecdotes, storytelling, working with what you've got to change it. And I think it's so ingrained, that perception of what a lecture is, but we can change it. I'd like for there to be a world where my style of teaching isn't unusual. That's my aim. Who knows? We might get there eventually, but until then, I will carry on trialing it out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emma. We're going to wrap it up there. There are some other questions which we can post across to you. I know the answer to these questions you've spoken about on your social medias. So if people go back for your past posts, they'll have answers there, your transition from research to teaching and your experiences of doing that. You publish and write a lot on this kind of area. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. I'd like to thank Emma for giving us an absolutely amazing presentation. And if you'd like to continue the conversation online, please do follow the @Biochemistry Society and @PPP Publishing on Twitter/X, where we can continue the conversation there. We do welcome suggestions for future topics and speakers to feature in the Biochemistry Focus webinar series. So if you have an idea for a webinar, we invite you to submit a proposal for it. And you can find out more information about that on the biochemistry.org website, where we also have past recordings that you can watch back from previous webinars that we have hosted. All of our webinars are listed on our website. And if you've missed any, please go and have a look up. There's loads and loads of great content up there. There's also material on our website and the YouTube channel. Details are appearing on the screen. A recording of today's webinar will also be available to watch and share with your colleagues in the near future. The Biochemistry Society 2026 awards are open. Emma was the recipient of the Teaching Award. Please do have a look at those awards and nominate people you feel are inspirational in their field. We have a wide range of recognition opportunities, and we've really streamlined the nomination process. So there's never been a better time to have a go at nominating an outstanding peer or colleague. The deadline is the 1st of November 2024, and submissions are welcome for both members and non-members alike. Finally, I'd like to highlight the importance it is to stay connected. We're a wonderful society of molecular bioscientists. If you're not already a member, do consider joining the Biochemical Society. We're a community of researchers and specialists, and take advantage of our key benefits, including discount registration for our society conferences. We do run a lot of teaching and learning conferences and materials, so they're excellent. Exclusive access to a wide range of grants and bursaries, and personal online access to our journals and more. Have a look at the website to find out more. I have been a member of the Biochemical Society for as long as I've been a biochemist, which is a very long time. I've got so much out of being part of the society, particularly learning about how to do pedagogical research, meeting a community of bioscience researchers like Emma, who do such great teaching, and embedding all of that into my practice. So once again, bang on time. Thank you all for joining us, and please do join us for the next webinar.